Hello guys, welcome you all to Gurukul online learning. Today we will be discussing about general physiology, which is the most basic topic of physiology. So at first we will be discussing about homeostasis. What is homeostasis? The various physiologic agreements which serve to restore the normal state of our body when it is disturbed is known as homeostasis. So let's say, for example, when our cells take over all the oxygens, our lungs provide new amount of oxygen to work with them. When we eat and our cell absorbs all the nutritions, our GIT or gastrointestinal systems that provides the more nutrition that we need to feed our cells. And the next topic or the subtopic under homeostasis that we will read here is feedback. So what is a feedback? The auto response of a system to an impulse which is received by the system is called feedback. So feedback is basically consists of effector and receptor. So what is the effector and receptor? The receptor which receives the impulse and effector which works according to the impulse. That is effector and receptors basically. And there are basically two types of feedback in our body, that is known as positive feedback system or positive feedback mechanism and negative feedback system or negative feedback mechanism. These two feedback system or mechanism works in our body separately or in different occasion to help us to maintain our normal physiological condition. So let's say we first discuss the positive feedback mechanism or positive feedback system. The positive feedback mechanism or positive feedback system tends to increase the event that caused it. Let's say it's not always good for our body, or it's not always helps our body to maintain the normal physiological condition. It may also cause harm in our body. Let's say a person who has lost 1 or 2 liters of blood in an accident, and the positive feedback mechanism will also cause the cardiac, and as the amount of blood from our body is gone away, like a very big amount of blood, our heart or cardiac muscle will turn to pump very slowly. So as the cardiac muscle cannot pump fast or pump in a good manner, our blood pressure will fall down, and as our blood pressure will fall down, blood flow into heart muscle will also fall down, and our positive feedback mechanism will aggravate this condition, which will cause further cardiac pumping will be reduced, and further heart muscle blood supply will be reduced, and ultimately this vicious cycle will go on and on and on until death occur to that person. So how we have understood, we should not laugh. I was laughing, sorry for that, but this is a very vicious thing to happen to any human being, and that can occur as a result of the positive feedback system. There are also positive feedback system can also do some good things, and it also does good things in our body. For example, blood clotting, like very small amount of blood when it goes out of our body, our vessels will come down, or our system, blood clotting system will send all the clotting factors to that portion, which will cause the clotting mechanism and build a cascade around it to stop all the bleeding, and the bleeding will be stopped ultimately, which is caused by the positive mechanism, positive feedback mechanism. And then the parturition mechanism. Parturition means the system of giving birth to a child, which our mothers given us all birth, and when the uterus starts to contract, and the positive feedback mechanism gives it boost, and the uterus will start to contract more forcefully, and when the crowning occurs, or the baby's head is seen through the cervix, and the positive feedback mechanism starts to aggravate that more efficiently, and ultimately the childbirth occurs, and which is a very important role of our positive feedback mechanism. So now we have known all the positive and also negative sides of the positive feedback mechanism. So positive feedback mechanism is very important and very dangerous for our body, and we all have known about the basic theory of the positive feedback mechanism. Here comes the positive feedback mechanisms, another important topic, which is known as the action potential. So when the action potential is generated, it is different type of system occurs when the nerve fiber is stimulated. Let's say a mosquito have bitten you, or like any system that given you a nervous stimulus, and this nervous stimulus will cause you a leakage of sodium from your cells, and the positive feedback mechanism will cause the leakage of more and more sodium. The explosion of sodium leakage will go on, and ultimately the action potential will take place. So that's also a very important thing about the positive feedback mechanism, and we will have to know very carefully and very well about the positive feedback mechanism. Alongside the positive feedback mechanism, there is also negative feedback mechanism, as we have seen in our previous slides, and there is also negative feedback mechanism. So negative feedback mechanism is the mechanism or feedback that tends to reduce the input. Like as we have given some input into a system and it tends to reduce it, that is known as the negative feedback mechanism. So let's say our blood pressure is higher, so you will have to tear it down or cut it down. That will be done by the negative feedback mechanism. And then also our carbon dioxide concentration in our body. So how the negative feedback mechanism controls all this? First of all, the blood pressure control system. The high blood pressure causes the series of reaction to promote lower blood pressure, and which is controlled by the baroreceptor systems in our body, and they control all the pressures. When the baroreceptor systems are stimulated, the negative feedback system comes and they control all the blood pressure. So blood pressure goes higher, negative feedback system, baroreceptors are stimulated, they inform the negative feedback mechanism, or they start the negative feedback mechanism, and our blood pressure is lowered by our body's physiological manner. And we were also talking about the regulation of carbon dioxide concentration in our body. So carbon dioxide, as the carbon dioxide concentration in our extracellular fluid goes up, the pulmonary ventilation. What is pulmonary ventilation? As we respirate, that is known as pulmonary ventilation, and pulmonary ventilation will occur more. Let's say we will ventilate more, we will hyperventilate and try to exhale those extra carbon dioxide which are more in our body or extracellular fluid, and we will cut them off from our body, and ultimately the ECF or extracellular fluids extra carbon dioxide level will be teared down to the normal level. That is also a good part of negative feedback mechanism. Then we will be moving on to if the carbon dioxide concentration in our extracellular fluid is lowered down, how will that be considered, or how will that be controlled? That will be controlled by we'll control our pulmonary ventilation and cut them down to lower. So we will ventilate very slowly and try to conserve all our carbon dioxide in our body, which will ultimately control and increase the amount of carbon dioxide in our extracellular fluid, which will ultimately make it to a normal level. So let's say we are done with all the positive feedback mechanisms and negative feedback mechanisms and very important topics which are there, and now we'll have to move on to the differences that they have. So as we have already discussed, what is the positive feedback mechanism? When the initiating factor or the stimulus is given and it is initiated or stimulated more aggressively, or that is more given by the body, that is known as the positive feedback mechanism. And the negative feedback mechanism is if some factor becomes excessive or deficient in our body, a control that consists of series of changes that changes the return to the factor towards a certain mean value, that is known as homeostasis or negative feedback mechanism. So our body basically wants to maintain a mean value of everything. So our positive and negative feedback mechanism, both they want to maintain the homeostasis of our body. So we have known the definition of both of them. So the role of homeostasis, the positive feedback mechanism, they can be harmful, as we have discussed. The positive feedback mechanism can be harmful at times, but the negative feedback mechanism, they are not that much harmful. So when we are discussing about the positive feedback mechanism, again we will know that when there will be like more blood loss in our body, there will be more positive feedback mechanism coming in way, and which will cause more and more bleeding, and which will ultimately cause less blood flow into the cardiac muscle, which will ultimately reach or push that person who has already lost a severe amount of blood or fluid from that body, and he will go on to death. So negative feedback mechanism does not offer or does not do any of that. So the most control system of our body is acted by or delivered by the negative feedback mechanism. So is there any vicious cycle involved in any of them? As we have known and discussed, the positive feedback mechanism is important, and they does very important programs or very important systems in our body, like blood clotting and parturition, giving birth to a child. These are very important things, but they also can be vicious or very dangerous when a big amount of blood is lost from the body of a person, which causes the vicious cycle, and a person can die of that also. So a vicious cycle can be turned into a body or in a human from the positive feedback mechanism, but negative feedback mechanism does not have any of that. So a negative feedback mechanism does not contain any vicious cycle. Ultimately, we will have to know the examples. So blood clotting, parturition mechanism, generation of insulin in our body, LH surge, insulin secretion, all of them consists of positive feedback mechanism. And in negative feedback mechanism, there will be like blood pressure controls, regulation of carbon dioxide level, regulation of acid-base balance. All of these are tiered down into our negative feedback mechanism. So these are very important topics, and we will have to know all the ins and outs of them. We have in Gurukul online learning, we always try to discuss all the basics and the very crux of all the topics, and if you want to study all of them, and if you want to know more about them, please get attached or be subscribed to our channel, and we will try to offer you many more good contents like all of them. Thank you for joining with us, and this is our topics, and hope you will be joining us for more classes. Thank you.